Hi, I'm John Berry. I am a volunteer here at Castlewood Canyon State Park, and I'm also a member of the Castlewood Historic Society. And I'm here to invite you to the Lucas Homestead, one of the homesteads here in Douglas County that we know and specifically about, and it's in the park here. And I'm going to give you a little history of the Lucas family. Patrick Lewis was an Irish immigrant who came to the United States in late 1800s and 1870s, and he ended up in the United States Army. And Margaret McCardle also came from Ireland. She was an immigrant. She came over here to visit the country, and she traveled around a lot and decided to stay. And the two of them got together during the Arizona Indian Wars in the late 1800s. And as I said, Lucas was in the military. Supposedly he was under the command of William Jackson Palmer, so there was a connection there to Castle Rock, of course, and railroad. And anyway, she became a volunteer nurse and was working in the Army hospital as they were dealing with the Indians in Arizona. And needless to say, they met, apparently fell in love and got married. And after the Indian crises were over, the Indians were put on reservations, etc. They decided to move to Colorado, and they came to Denver. And between the time they were married, they decided to homestead. They had a child, Mary, the oldest. They will end up having 8 children, and they were in Denver. And in the 1890s, they decided to come here at the mouth of Wildcat Canyon on Cherry Creek, and they established a homestead. Now, the homestead law in the United States, this was in 1892. The homestead law was some 30 years old by this time. The Homestead Act was passed during the Civil War under the Lincoln administration. The idea was to populate the West. Of course, also, Lincoln being a politician, he needed as many states as he could get to win the electoral vote. So he was hoping that all of the people that would come out here would be good Republicans. And so they opened it up, and they said that you could get 160 acres. If you lived on it, you built a 12-foot by 12-foot home, and you cultivated the ground or worked the ground. Of course, by 1892, the government realized that coming across the Mississippi River and coming out into the Great Plains, that 160 acres just wouldn't really do it. And so they would change the laws through the years and add to it so that you could actually end up homesteading a 640-acre piece of ground, and that would be 1 square mile, of course. But anyway, in 1892, when we have a lot of questions about the Lucas family, because they came out here and they homesteaded 160 acres right here. We know now that they only had about 22 acres of cultivated land. And so that left all the rest of it in forest, grassland, scrubland, etc. And so you wonder why they did it. And one of the possible answers is that by 92, a lot of the land was already homesteaded. Castle Rock was, over 20 years old. People were living there. The railroad was going full blast, and Franktown was established. So maybe this was all that was left. There might not have been a whole lot left. So anyway, story of them is that Patrick, obviously he was a hard worker, and as we're going to show you around here, around the homestead, he was a farmer, a rancher. He did it all, and they did it as a family. As I said, he had 8 children, which was very common in those days because that gave you more help around the farm. Lucas was known, he was, of course, both he and Mary were Catholics, and so he was known to, from time to time, would actually walk from here over to Castle Rock to go to the Old Stone Church, the Catholic Church in Castle Rock, during the early 1900 or 20th century, and he was an interesting character as far as we know. He at times, one time supposedly he took some old mattresses and put them across the road up here above and turned it into a toll road. Tried to charge a toll for people to use a county road, and I don't know how successful he was, but we do know historically that there were a lot of toll roads around. A lot of people did that, and so it was not uncommon to do that. He got injured. He lived actually all of his life here. He got his foot crushed in a binder about 1936, I believe, and then shortly thereafter he had a heart attack and he died. And his wife Mary continued to live on the homestead in the house that's behind me, and until she decided to go into Denver and stay at her home in Denver until she passed away.
Hi, I'm Ron Claussen, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the life and times of the Lucas family. They lived in this house behind me, so that's kind of instrumental to be here. And some of the things they did and had to do were typical of the time, such as everybody took a bath in the same bath water, oldest to the youngest, and hence the term, don't throw the baby out with the bath water. Also, I think about the holidays. Milk cows don't take the day off. So even though 4th of July, whatever you want to call a holiday, they actually had to get up, the Lucas family, and milk the cows twice a day. And they had to feed the chickens and stuff. So when you're in the rural life out here on a farm, on a ranch, that was basically your life. You were paying attention to the livestock and the crops. So that was a big focus of the family. That is nothing unusual. That's the way it was in Nebraska, Iowa, Colorado, all of that stuff. It was basically the same. However, there is one unique function or happening for the Lucases, and that was August 3rd, 1933. When you look up the canyon that way, you'll notice that it really narrows, and that's Wildcat Canyon up there. And about 2 miles up that way is the Castlewood Dam. It burst on August 3rd at 1:20 a.m. and sent 1.7 billion gallons of water down through that narrow canyon. The water was reportedly 50 feet high. Now here's the interesting thing about the Lucases. They were here. There were 6 of them living in this house according to the census. And the 2-bedroom windows up here face right up that canyon. So about 1:30 in the morning, they would hear this great roar. There were many people downstream that said they could hear the water coming because of the roar. So now you're up there, you hear this big roar. There was no electricity around here. There was no light pollution. So at 1:30 in the morning, looking out that window, looking up that canyon, you really wouldn't have seen anything coming at you. Unless there was a bolt of lightning. There was an electrical storm which contributed to the failure of the dam. So you'd get this flash, you'd see this big wall of water, you'd hear this tremendous roar, all headed to the house. When you look up that canyon, come on out sometime and look, it makes a nice sweeping curve and then it heads straight for the house. So it would be kind of scary. What we've done in a little bit of our research is found out the water didn't get this high, so there was nothing to worry about. But what would you do? What would you think? It would be kind of a tremendous event for you in your short period of time here at the homestead. So that's one unique thing. Then John mentioned that good old Patrick would string 3 bed springs across the road and charge 25 cents to come down. I got that story from a good old boy by the name of John Ames, and he used to come down here fishing, and he'd have to go down the road because there are all kinds of little fishing pools and ponds up above that curve. So he provided that story. He also shared with me that Robert Lucas was about 7 foot tall and maybe a little slow, but he liked to work with concrete. Notice the house is concrete, the milk and parlor is concrete, the fancy wall is concrete. There is a lot of concrete work around here, and that's because Robert really liked to work with that kind of stuff. So he was instrumental in building all this. When I think about the Lucases being dairy farmers, milk farmers, all of that. Well, Hugh, when he left the homestead here, he went down here just a little southwest off of Highway 83 is a road called Lucas Avenue. You go east on that, and that's where the Lucas Dairy was. So that's what he did. Cormac ended up in the state hospital down in Colorado Springs, and he started a dairy operation down there. So those are 2 of the sons that we know that went off into Dad's business and things like that. So the family did go through and pass on a lot of that good stuff. Also, as if you come out and walk around this place, right beyond Margaret's lilacs down here is the well. That's where they got the water. Up that way is the outhouse. Well, in the middle of the night, would you like to go trundling across here in the dark? Remember, no light pollution. To the outhouse? Well, they'd have chamber pots. Who do you think emptied the chamber pots in the morning? Who do you think went down to the spring house, which is the refrigerator? No electricity, so what they used is spring water to cool the milk that they produced, and they'd bring the milk up to the house for cereal, whatever. Also, who's going to go out and get the wood? They had this really pretty ornate wood-burning stove, and the stove was used for cooking, heating water for the bath, heating water for the coffee, and heating the house. There was only one stove in the house, and it's a 2-story house. So somebody has to go out and gather up all of that wood and bring it up. And then you start going around and looking at the homestead. There's a lot of fence posts and a lot of fencing up? Who cut the wood for the fence post? And some of that kind of stuff. So that was what life was here at the Lucas Homestead. If you look at the knoll down as you come into the park, you'll notice a little irrigation ditch around it. That was to get water up to the North 40 where they irrigated barley, rye, stuff like that to feed the cattle and the horses. Who dug the irrigation ditch? The Lucas family. So when you start thinking about life and times of the Lucas family, it was really hard. And over by the tree is that's where Margaret would do all the entertaining. She loved to entertain. So there were tables out there and she did the entertaining. And she liked to entertain in the house, but it wasn't that big. And her decorating skill leaves a little bit to be questioned. The front room down here on the first floor was the parlor, and it was painted chocolate brown. Not my favorite, but that's what she preferred. So as you come out to the park and you start looking around this place, just think of that. When you look in the building there, you can see where the floor joists were placed for the first floor and the second floor. We have a door here to get into the root cellar. All good old houses had root cellars. Back here, they didn't hide from tornadoes, they just stored fruit. I'm from Nebraska. That's where you go for a tornado. So as you wander around and look, then off to the side over here, around the corner, are 9 historic apple trees. Don't know if it's fact or fiction. Doing my research on the Lucases, I found out that there was a Lambert orchard over in Sedalia, and he sold saplings. And that was about the time the Lucases was establishing themselves here. So did all of those apple trees come from Lambert's in Sedalia? They are old. They are heirloom apples. We have yet to identify them. We don't really know anybody that old. I guess I would know. So that's another issue. But this is just a really interesting place to come out and visit and think about what the good old days were. I know I've looked all over the house. There's wires sticking out, but that's for construction. But I can't see where there's any place to hook electrical wires to the house for electricity, lights, etc. inside. So what I like to tell the kids, and I'll end with the story, the kids had to play their video games in the dark.
As Ron said about the homestead and how people, how they farmed, and they were dairy farmers as well. I'm standing kind of in the middle of what was the milking barn. It was a 2-story building. When it was here, second floor was used to store the hay so they could drop it down into the feeding troughs. The cattle would come in and they would go over to their stanchions. I think there were about, we determined 6 or 8 on each side. They had feeding troughs so you could bring the cattle in. And cows got to the point to where they went to the same stanchion each day. And they would get in there and they would stand here. And this would be the area where I'm standing, would be in the middle. Their hind legs would be back in here because this is where, this trough was where they would pee a lot of times while they're standing there, and so it would run off. And so anyway, and over here was the horse paddock on this side, on the outside the building, and up in there is the roof that came off of the building when the sides were all destroyed. We assume it was a wooden building, but this is good evidence of the concrete idea that was being used at that time by a lot of folks. especially we find here in the Wildcat Canyon area and up around a caretaker's place at the dam.
Well, in the life and times of the Lucas family, this was their refrigerator. It's a spring house, and I'm standing toes in the water of a spring that starts right up here, comes down here, and heads on down to Cherry Creek down the hill. And what they would do, they'd dig a pit and let it fill up with the spring water, and that's where they would take and put the milk. So they'd milk the cows up the hill here at the milking parlor, and they'd bring the milk down and put it in containers in the spring, and that would keep it cool. And in the winter time, keep it warm, because the spring runs at about 50 degrees or something like that. So in the wintertime, it's warmer than the outside. In the summer, it's cooler. Now imagine if I looked that way, I can see the house. So if when you woke up in the morning and you wanted to have cereal and you wanted milk on your cereal, you'd have to walk from the house all the way down here, get your milk, and take it up. So that's about it. Just another little chapter in the life and times of Lucas's. Cut.
Yeah, great.
Huh?